Starting recording. Sweet. So super excited to bring you DK today. I have known DK for maybe 3 to 4 years, and he's a big part of the reason I moved to Japan. He was working in Japan, but of course, as soon as I moved there, he left and quit, and decided to travel the world and make videos. So while I was, pushing pixels on a screen, he was getting 40 million views on his travel videos. And then I guess later I was started to become interested in meditation and looked at DK as a mentor on that. And just as I thought about building products, I've always looked up to DK in terms of the things he does, his values, principles, just kind of the way that he thinks about things. So excited for him to share his story. I think it'll be pretty cool because I think that there's like a new class of entrepreneurs that are forming in terms of how you can think about building a company. And I think it's inspiring and maybe it can give you some ideas about what career options might exist. And with that, I'll hand it over. So yeah, this is the Zoom Basic speaker series. So we have 40 minutes and that is the cutoff time, at which point the video will shut off. So I'm going to stop talking and DK, maybe just leave like 10 minutes, maybe like 11:30 or something. Just open up for questions. Obviously you have total control for how you want to run this.
Sounds good.
This is your show.
All right. Hi everybody. I'm DK. Today I'm going to give a talk called How to Side Project, which seems especially relevant since a lot of you seem to have gotten shafted by the whole coronavirus situation and internships and the availability thereof. And I think working on side projects is one of the most fun and impactful things you can do. So before we get into it, I'm going to give you a little intro about who I am and my background. I graduated from Princeton in 2015. I took 5 years to finish school because I took a year off in the middle. And during that time, I worked as a software engineering intern at Facebook, Twilio, Hack and Y, and then I worked as a product manager intern at Google. And I transitioned from an intern to a full-time for the 2 years following my graduation. So for the first year, I worked on Google Search in Mountain View, and then my second year on Google Maps in Tokyo, which is where I abandoned Jake quickly thereafter he arrived. And right after my my time at Google, I started working on making videos on Facebook. And so this was the video that Jake was referencing. It is my 1 minute of fame, my biggest hit by far. And it was a video about my favorite things about Japan. According to Facebook, it reached over 100 million people, but they inflate those numbers. So I don't know what the real reach is, but you know what? I'll take it. And so after 6 months of working on these videos, I decided to do something even less conventional and spent some time studying meditation at various retreats around India, Myanmar, and the States, culminating with a 3-month silent retreat in Massachusetts, where I didn't talk to anybody for 3 months, which is quite an experience. Would highly recommend. Not for everybody, but it is definitely a life-changing experience. And I can talk about that more in the Q&A or anytime after this talk if you guys are interested in meditation and are curious about going on retreats. And so since the start of last year, I've been working on various projects. I've worked on an online course called Intern Playbook, where I made resources. It's an online course about how to get the most out of your internships. I didn't run it this year because everything's remote and that changes things pretty fundamentally. And then for the past, for the past year or so, I've been working on building tools, going back to my first love of programming and building tools for learning things like getting better at music, which you'll see later, as well as helping me find ways to better spend my time and geared around like productivity and digital mindfulness and those sorts of things. And so before I get into the meat of the talk, I do want to give some context on where all of this falls. So there's a book called The Road to Character by David Brooks. And in it, he talks about these two sets of virtues that we can cultivate. They're the eulogy virtues, and then there are the resume virtues. The eulogy virtues are the things that you'd expect people to talk about when you die. It's like, okay, let's say that Jake, knock on wood, passes away, and we're at his funeral. No one's gonna say, man, Jake was really, really great at selling. Just like wrote the best code ever, and his code always ran, even if you didn't write any tests, or like he just absolutely crushed it when it came to selling to enterprise businesses or anything or things like that. The things that people would talk about are more along the lines of, oh, there was this one time that my car broke down on the side of the road, and I called Jake, and he stopped whatever he was doing and came and got me. And I remember that because that was such a kind gesture. And so in the grand scheme of things, I think that things like being happy, being kind, cultivating your relationships, whether love well, is much, much more important than things like your career, skills, and money. And so this talk is going to be focused on side projects, which is going to help you with your, professional skills and your career. But I do want to contextualize it by saying that it's not everything. Even if you never work on side projects or never work a high-paying tech job or anything along those lines, it doesn't matter. It's okay. But with that, it's not that those things don't matter at all. It's just less important than things like your well-being. But the most impactful skill for my career that I've developed is shipping side projects. Let's talk about why that is. So to explain why side projects have been so helpful, one of the things that I want to share is how I got my Google APM internship. So I'd worked as a software engineering intern for 3 summers, and by that point I knew what software engineering was like. I was like, all right, you show up, especially when you're an intern, you have other people tell you what to do. You write the code, get it checked out. And I was like, all right, I can do that for another summer, or I can try something completely different. And when I saw the Google's product management position, I was like, that seems interesting. I want to try working with people. And so I went through the interview process, and this is the email that I got back from one of the people who had interviewed me. Just heard the good news. This is after I got my return offer. And let me know if I can be helpful as you assess options, make your decision. I'm sure you have lots of great options, so this will be an exciting but nerve-wracking time for you, I'm sure. You should know that I've interviewed hundreds of candidates, and you're one of the very best. I think you'd rock it at Google. Some stuff about me joining his team, and anyway, congrats again. So I'm not sharing this to be like, oh, look how dope I am, or trying to like humble brag. This is surprising because I'm actually not very good at interviewing, and I can actually remember. I know exactly why he felt so strongly about me during that interview, and it had to do with this side project that we had talked about called WebTimer. So WebTimer is a Chrome extension that I built back in 2011 during my sophomore winter break that keeps track of how you spend your time in your browser and then just shows you back that data. Very simple. So I had built it during winter break because I think I was spending way too much time on like Reddit and Facebook, and I was like, all right, this has got to stop. And so I was like, okay, if I track my time and I'm able to see visually just how much of my time on my computer is spent on those sites, maybe it'll help me not waste so much time. And so I built this tool, and over the years it got thousands of users. And during that interview, one of the questions that the interviewer and I had talked about was, what are some things I would change about Google products? And I had talked about how I liked iOS more than Android. And maybe looking back, I don't know if that was a ballsy move, but I gave the reason because iOS gives you sane defaults and it minimizes decision fatigue by making choices for you that just work. Whereas Android and Google historically has always kind of like leaned towards giving users almost too much control, where if you click on options, you just have a million options and settings, and it can be kind of overwhelming for you to navigate that versus reducing that decision set and actually making the product better by reducing the number of features or options that are available. And I remember he really, really liked the answer. And that was centered around me talking about my experience working on the side project, WebTimer. And so I think one of the biggest benefits of working on side projects is that you get experience that you otherwise don't have a chance to get. So especially with internships, I feel like you're stuck in a catch-22 where these companies are looking for you to have experience, but you don't get that experience until you've had those internships. So it's like, how do you actually qualify for these positions that give you experience if you don't already have experience? And I think one of the best workarounds is to work on side projects, because as you build products that other people use, you can build marketing skills, product skills, engineering skills, like all these things that you would normally need to learn on the job by yourself or with a small team, simply because you can do this. No one's stopping you. The internet is open for everybody, and you can build things and launch it and then gain experience that way. Another benefit is you can also make money. I've made thousands of dollars on my side projects, either by selling licenses or selling the projects. And and this also opens the opportunity for you to try to transition some of your side projects into full-time gigs if you find that working in a corporate environment isn't for you. So this is the path that I'm currently on, where I'm not the greatest at selling because I'm focused much more on product, but it is an avenue that becomes open if this is a skill set that you decide to cultivate. And lastly, it's just really, really fun. The whole process of coming up with an idea, building it, and then releasing it to the world and having people use it and give you feedback is super rewarding. And it's basically like, if you know how to code or design or basically just like create things on your computer, you're basically a magician. You like tap these black squares on a metal box and then stuff happens. Like, I still can't get over how crazy that is. And so, yeah, you get all these benefits by working on side projects. And I'm going to focus on the experience and the hella fun parts, because the money parts, I'm not going to focus so much on how to convert your side projects into businesses. That's a whole nother ball game in itself. And so this talk is tailored mostly to people who have either little or no experience building side projects. And I'm just gonna give my opinionated recommendations for how to get started and how to think about the whole process. So with coming up with the idea, my recommendation is to build the tiniest useful thing for yourself. There are a lot of ways to come up with side project ideas, but this for me seems to be the most useful, because in the beginning, the most important thing is to build a habit of shipping. It's not to put out something really incredible or beautiful or world changing. It's to get into the practice of building things and actually shipping it. And it's important that you ship it, because a lot of people fall into the trap of building things but never releasing it to the world, and there you lose out on a lot of benefits of actually exposing your work to the world and getting feedback on those things. And so I'll dive into each of these 3 points: tiniest, useful, and for yourself. Let's start with tiny. If this were a live presentation, I would ask the question, how long do you think it took me to build the initial version of Webtimer? So this is a product that ended up getting at its peak around 70,000 users and had around like 400 5-star reviews. And you might think that I spent a lot of time putting a lot of polish into that product, but you would be wrong. I spent literally one day building out the initial version, because in the very beginning, I was like, I just want to get something out there. It's not about putting out the best product, but starting with a kernel of something. And once it is out there, then I can iterate on it. And I think having it be tiny is really motivational and rewarding, because you get to reach a success metric very, very quickly, where you don't have to wait months before you release your product. You just do it in a day or a week, and you're like, I did something, and you can ride that momentum instead of languishing in the purgatory of trying to polish an unfinished product. And so I actually found my notes from 2011, where I wrote what are the features that I want in Webtimer. So I wrote Chrome extension to keep track of how much time you spend on the website, specified by the user. And for 1.0, I wanted to only count time from the active tab, so that it doesn't count time spent in other tabs. I want to show today and stats for all time using a pie chart, using Google's API. And then this last bullet point is the most important one, where I wrote no idle yet. And that's referring to, if you walk away from your computer goes to sleep, then like it should stop keeping track of your browsing time. But I didn't build that in from the very beginning, even though you might think that's like a required feature I want to get the very bare minimum. And for your first side project, or when you're first launching the initial version of your side project, I would say go as bare bones as possible. Don't worry about getting as making it feature complete, because you'll think of more features that you need to add, and it just slows you down. All right, useful. So this is one of my favorite diagrams when it comes to product development, and it's called how to build a minimum viable product. Not like this. So if your goal is to build a car, a lot of people think about building their MVPs kind of like piecewise. They're like, all right, I'm going to build a wheel, and then like 2 wheels, and then the car frame. And at the very end, now you have a feature that people can use and love. But in the first 3 stages, it's not that useful and not that beneficial for people to interact with. And this is kind of the trap that people fall into when they think about MVPs. They just think like, all right, since this is just a test, it doesn't matter. I'm going to put out something that kind of accomplishes what I want it to do, but it doesn't quite get there. Alternatively, the way that you can approach your project development process is by using progressive enhancement. So you can start off with a skateboard, and then make a scooter, and then a bike, and then a motorcycle, and then the car. So you have the fully featured thing. And at the end of the process, you end up with the same outcome of having a fully featured car, but the process by which you get there is very different. People love skateboards, people love scooters, people love bikes, and these things are useful in their own right, even without getting all the way to an engine and having autonomous driving. And so the useful part, one of the ways that you can think about this is to build an SLC, not an MVP. SLC is a term coined by one of the founders of WP Engine, and it stands for simple, lovable, and complete. So in contrast to an MVP, which might feel like an unloved child or a Frankenstein of different parts coming together, an SLC is about creating the smallest useful, complete thing that people can love. And so, for example, with WebTimer, if I thought about making as fully featured as possible, I would have thought about, okay, do I send like email reminders or like updates every week, being like, oh, here's how much time you spent. Do I create these reports? And then do I support like multiple accounts and multiple browsers? And once you start thinking about those things, you might do a lot of things kind of okay rather than a few things well. And I would say that for building products, doing a few things well is a much more compelling and useful approach. And the best part about building an SLC, not an MVP, is that if your product is complete, you can just walk away from the product and still have it function really well. Oftentimes MVPs are built with the assumption that you'll go back and improve it and like fix all the things that are broken. But if you just start with something that is already complete in itself, then you don't need to work on it and have the alternative be to trash it. So for WebTimer, I haven't touched it in like 5 years basically, but it still works and it still has the core functionality and people are still using it. All right, and the last bit. So we talked about building the tiniest useful thing for yourself. For yourself, I like to build things for myself because it makes the product development process a lot faster. So if you are familiar with the problem and it's something that you find annoying in your own life, then you have a much better intuition for how to go about solving that problem. And when you decide to share it with the world, you might launch it and you might get a lot of people who like it. And that's awesome. That would be success. But even if nobody cares, even if nobody likes the thing that you've made, that's also success. Because if you've made it for yourself, then it doesn't really matter whether a lot of other people find it useful. So with WebTimer, if nobody else liked it, that would have been fine because I found having that tool quite beneficial in my work process. And this is nice because it decouples the outcome of like whether people like it or not from your own internal assessment of how the project went. And it also means that you have whether the project is successful or not is within your full control. You're not dependent on outside factors as to whether you feel good about the project. Because if you just build it for yourself, then the only way to fail is to not build it. Otherwise, you've succeeded. And so you want to make it as easy as possible to succeed so that you create this habit of shipping and building products and getting it out there. All right, so once you have your idea, you've thought of the tiniest useful thing that you want to build for yourself, how do you go about actually building it? And this is something that I spent way too much time obsessing over when I was first getting started with building side projects. I was like, all right, I got to choose the best tech stack. I'm going to evaluate all these different web frameworks. I'm going to read a million articles about Rails versus Django, which is what was available at the time, and figure out like what the best thing to do is. And over these years, my opinion has changed quite a bit, and it's that tech just doesn't matter. So for one, unless you're planning to convert these side projects into like a business or a decade-long project, you won't be working on it for that long of a period of time. So it doesn't matter if you choose, the absolute best framework that'll stand the test of time. I was looking at some of my code from 2013, and I don't know how long you guys have been in web development, but I was using Angular 1 with CoffeeScript, and neither of those things like really exist today. I mean, it's just like it's dead. And so like no matter what tech you choose, especially if you're working in a fast changing environment like web development, it probably will be obsolete in a while anyway. And so I would say just choose the most popular best thing that you can go with, and then just like forget about it. There's no need to compare a million different frameworks to try to figure out the differences, unless your goal is to learn about those frameworks. Then tech does matter, because your goal is to evaluate the differences between those things. But if you're just trying to build things, I would say don't worry so much about what language you're using, what framework you're using, all those things, or even like what platform you're building for. Just like get in the habit of building, and all those things you can just pick up or change at a later time. And I have a set of heuristics that I use to decide what technology I want to go with. Because even though I think the tech stack that you use doesn't really matter, I mean, you still need to choose something in order to build. So the way that I go about selecting my tech stack is preferring things that are good and popular over things that are perfect and obscure. And this is mostly centered around having a vibrant community. So for example, if you're doing web development today, I would say it's a no-brainer to go with React. I mean, you have other frameworks like Vue and Svelte and things that might provide more benefits or approach things in a different way that you find beneficial. But if you I like going with the largest community, because that means if I run into a problem, then there's likely a blog post about it or a Stack Overflow answer. And I know that whatever changes that are made in the web development space, a lot of other people will be migrating from whatever is the most popular at the time to that thing. And it'll just be a lot easier to be within that ecosystem where I have a lot of support, basically, because I chose something that is popular rather than something that might be a better tool, but just like not that many people are using. I also think it's more useful to gain mastery of a few tools over just being familiar with many tools. When I first started working on side projects, I tended to dabble with a lot of different languages and frameworks and approaches. But now I just have a few hammers that I am very, very familiar with. And it makes the product development process just a lot faster and much more fun because you know these tools inside and out. So instead of trying to learn Python, Haskell, JavaScript, TypeScript, PHP, and all these different languages, I would just say like, all right, decide I'm going to learn JavaScript really well. And then because it's available on both the front end and the back end, I'm going to use that as my one hammer with say like React as a base framework in order to build my tools.
I have a question.
And oh yeah.
So there's a lot of people here who have not had experience with development and coding. Can you kind of give, have you seen any cool tools built with no code? And can you kind of give an example, like, do you have a favorite no-code tool, if any? Obviously, I know you're on you're biased towards coding.
Yeah, I haven't used that many no-code tools, but I mean, you have so many options available now. People have created really incredible things with Webflow, or even with just like Airtable and like Zapier, for instance, you can hook things up so that you don't need to know how to code. So even there, like I would say, knowing a few of those tools really well. Like if you're like a Webflow master, that is generally much more useful than like having experience with like WordPress and Webflow and Wix and a bunch of other like website creators. So the same principles apply even if you aren't developing. Cool. All right. And then with the skills that you're learning, with the things that you're developing, I would say start narrow, keep your scope narrow, and then expand rather than starting broad and then trying to deepen your knowledge. So if for the people who do know how to code, this is what a common web stack looks like nowadays. My projects usually incorporate every single one of those things. We have React, Redux, TypeScript, Sass, Babel, Webpack, Jest, and ESLint. And in the beginning, I was like, what in the world is going on? How do I even like start to navigate this ecosystem? Because there's so many things to learn. And my approach would be, and this applies even if you're not coding, just like conceptually, I'm talking about the learning process of how to go about building your side projects. I would just start with like say React and get really good at that. And then once I'm comfortable with that, then expand to learning TypeScript and then focusing on my build tools like Babel and Webpack, as opposed to trying to learn all these things at once and then get some product out there, because at that point, you're never going to launch because there are just too many things to learn. And finally, the launch process. And this is relevant regardless of whether you know how to code or not. I think launching garbage is way better than not launching at all. And one of the challenges, and this might seem counterintuitive because you think, all right, whatever side projects I launch or whatever things I put out there on the internet is going to be associated with me. And if like recruiters see this or other people see my work and it turns out not to be, the greatest thing that I've ever created, then like, wouldn't that reflect poorly on me? But I'd say this is a starting point. By the fallacy of thinking that you're gonna spend a bunch of time by yourself polishing something and then releasing something beautiful often doesn't work out, because it takes time to develop. It takes time and a lot of iterations to develop the skills needed to produce really good products and projects. And so like everyone pretty much produces garbage when they first start, and it's about overcoming that fear of how you think your work will reflect on you. And generally, like this is also useful because it's an important life ability and skill to be able to decouple your work from your own like identity and your self-worth. And so getting in the process of just sharing whatever you create and not feeling so attached to the outcome of that thing is a very useful ability. And with launching, when you first start off, it's probably going to be low quality, but that's just in the very beginning.
Hey,
and it's much more important.
I'm going to interrupt you because Zoom tells me we have 7.5 minutes left.
Oh, okay.
And I will send out your deck afterwards, but I want to make sure we have time for some questions because I know some people may have some.
Okay.
Can I give you 20 seconds to wrap up?
All right. Let me see if there's anything really. There was a case study. The short thing here is basically you want to write things in a way that feels compelling to people. So for example, instead of writing like SlowTube is a web app that I created that slows down YouTube videos, but instead of saying I made SlowTube an app to slow down YouTube videos, I wrote I made SlowTube a web app to learn songs from YouTube by ear in the guitar subreddit. And that did much better. So when you're talking about your product, it's important to think about how people who are going to use it are going to benefit rather than the feature set that you've created. So that's about marketing, tips for launching, and okay, I'll close with this. There's a site called justforfun.io, and this is a really, really great source of inspiration and just to see like what kind of things people have built and shared. So for instance, you have this thing like this bongo cat. It's like the silliest, greatest thing. But this site is like chock full of stuff like this, where you can just check out. I was playing with Warp Farm yesterday, where you build your own fish marine ecosystem, and this will give you a lot of ideas about different like projects that you can build and what other people have built. And with that, that will be the end of my prezo. Thanks for
Awesome.
listening. And I am open for your questions.
So yeah, I think I'm sorry that I cut off the case studies. I think those are awesome. You guys should take a look at the deck. I'll send it out afterwards. And I know that I sent out some links before. So if you haven't had the chance to try Intention, do it. I've actually never used SlowTube, but Intention is awesome and is on my computer. Cool. Okay, I'm gonna start. Why did you quit Google in 1 minute?
All right, 1 minute. I would say I enjoyed the type of impact that I was having making videos more than the type of impact that I was having at Google. I mean, I love my job. Working as a PM, especially in Tokyo, was super fun, but it's very broad and shallow impact where I was working on Google Maps and I can help somebody find a place to eat lunch maybe like 5% faster. And that's going to affect millions of people. But that's very different from being able to build a tool that fundamentally changes how people interact with their computer, with like Intention, for instance, or like with the videos. I made some videos about why I'm vegetarian, or at the time vegetarian, now vegan. And I had people sending me messages being like, hey, I had my first vegetarian Thanksgiving with my family because of your video. And that's something I would never be able to do with my job at Google. And I just found that a lot more rewarding. And in addition, Google's fantastic, but at the end of the day, it's just another company. And you have a lot of bureaucracy, as with every company. And there were things that I felt misaligned on. Like, for instance, Google's incentive is to drive growth above most other things. And that means trying to capture people's attention as much as possible. So like sending more notifications and building, using designs like infinite feeds in order to get people to come back. And those are things that I didn't feel fully aligned with, but that was a lesser concern then than it is now. At the time, I was like, I just find a lot more rewarding to work on things that give me deep and narrow impact rather than broad and shallow impact.
All right, if you want to unmute yourself, I guess maybe post in the chat. We can, I don't think, yeah, just unmute yourself and start talking if you have a question.
I wanted to ask actually about your experience with the silent retreat that you did for 3 months. So it was interesting how you said that like it was a really good experience, but it's also not for everyone. And as someone like that does meditate daily, like I've recommended to a lot of friends, but they also say I can't do it for like more than 3 minutes without getting distracted, or I feel like my brain just doesn't work that way. And I think what people want to see is like immediate results a lot of the time. So like just by using Headspace, how can I actually like use what I learned in a Headspace or Calm or something like that, like in my everyday life, like at work or school or whatever. For the silent retreat, for people who feel like they could have the potential to really stick with a program like that, for you, where did you feel like it really paid the dividends, like in real life settings?
DK, you got to unmute. Unmute. Cool.
Am I still muted?
No, you're good.
Oh, okay. I would say this is a fun question to answer because it really affects everything. For me, meditation changed my relationship with life, myself, with the world, and like with other people. And it's difficult to succinctly capture like what those changes are. But I would say it's a big part of it is just like learning to accept life as it is and not resisting reality as it's being presented. So for instance, with coronavirus, you might be thinking, oh man, like it really sucks that, we're trapped in here and like I can't, have opportunities that I normally have. But I feel like meditation gives you the space to be able to respond to situations and say like, you know what, this is how it is. And I'm going to make the best of it rather than resisting what's happening. And to clarify my previous comment from earlier about it not being for everybody, I feel that way about 3-month retreats right off the bat. I think meditation is for everybody. But with a 3-month retreat, I think it's something that is useful to work up to rather than like jump straight into.
Thanks.
All right, Zoom's going to cut us off. Last question. You probably will be cut off midway.
What was your favorite country that you traveled to?
Oh, Japan. I still have a soft spot for Tokyo and Japan. It's just a really incredible place. All right. Thanks, everybody. Really great being here for the Zoom basic Zoom speaker series. And if you have any more questions, feel free to tweet at me at DK_the_human, or you can email, reach out to me. I'm happy to chat about whatever you guys are working on.
Cool. And I will send over the links and things like that as well. Yeah, thanks everyone for joining, including we have someone here who's building a video chat software that we may try to use for next week's presentation. So he's sitting in, and that will be exciting as well. So yeah, talk to everybody next week, and we'll send this out. Thank you very much, DK.